Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. So today's episode is going to be a little different than episodes that we've done in the past. Some people have referred to us as CEOs and founders as intellectual athletes, which means that we have to be operating at top performance, both mentally, physically, intellectually, and so be it. And so today's guest is the foremost authority when it comes to just overall health and well-being. In the spirit of true disclosure, I guess if you want to call it that, I'm also a client of our particular guest here, which is why I wanted to bring him on to the show today, because I've been so impressed. I've been obsessed about my health, making sure that I had every edge possible. And I've been so impressed with my experience that I decided, you know what, I'm going to bring Regan Archibald on the show today and introduce him to you. So Regan, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thanks for having me on, Charles. I'm honored to be here.
No worries, buddy. You know, that's the thing that I think a lot of entrepreneurs overlook. They think that it really comes down to just hard work and strategy alone that's going to help take their company beyond seven figures and multiples. Oftentimes, you'll find the more time they're spending behind their desk, sometimes is an inverse relationship between their ability to produce and make great decisions versus if they spent a little more time focusing in on their health and their mind and well-being.
Couldn't agree more. I was actually with the author Benjamin Hardy. I've always loved his work, and so I was really excited to spend some time with him. But that's one of the things he told me. He said, man, I've got 8 days and then my next book with Dan is due. And is there anything you can do to help me? Because what starts to happen is, as entrepreneurs, we push ourselves over and over again for so long, we forget that we've got to recharge our body, recharge our mind. And then the decisions we make become pretty sloppy, and you can see it, but usually it's not until you look in the rearview mirror that you can start to see all these chaos you created and some dumpster fires that could have been avoided if you just took a minute to focus on your health.
Sure. The typical entrepreneur, they wake up not having quality sleep, so they're exhausted. They get up in the morning, they load themselves up with caffeine because they've got all this brain fog. Then throughout the day, they're under all these different stresses or whatnot. Their anxiety levels go up, they go down, and then they get towards the end of the day and they have to finish their day, usually with some sort of cocktail in order to unwind and take themselves off of that intensity, go to bed a little later than they should go to bed, and then repeat the cycle all over again. What is the impact that that typically has in the body, both short term and then long term?
I think you bring up a good point, because sleep is foundational for health. So if you want a really good life, then you've got to sleep really good, is my opinion. Because think about the decision making if somebody's got poor sleep. So imagine trying to run your business if you're drunk all the time. That's essentially what's happening when we lose sleep. And then as that cycle gets repeated, what we see is cortisol levels in the adrenal glands. We start to see the cortisol levels start to fluctuate, and that it impacts the hormones in the body. And any man, especially if they're, I don't know, it seems like in the entrepreneurial world, there's almost as many women as there are men, but men, especially as our testosterone starts to lower, we lose confidence in our ability to decide. And we start to waver in our decisions, we lose focus. And then we go back in reverse and we say, what's your life look like? How's your sleep been in the last 2 or 3 years? And they say, well, I go to bed around 11, it takes me about an hour to fall asleep. I wake up at 6 and start my day. And it, just like you said, it starts with a stimulant, caffeine of some sort, a nicotine toothpick, whatever it might be to get the brain going. But those stimulants, they come at a cost. It's kind of like spending money out of your savings account. You can only do that for so long before it starts to take a hit. The thing I find is that the decisions that get made could be completely reversed if they first got the sleep corrected, because that's impacting the hormones, that it impacts the gut, and it has just a ripple effect on their entire life.
Now, you work with some of the top CEOs around. I think actually that's predominantly your target market, just happens to be CEOs and business owners. Is that right? Is that most of the people you tend to work with?
That's it. And actually, I work with a lot of their wives too. We don't realize what a mess that you can create in our home life when our physical health is not balanced. We can hold it together at work, but it's the spouse who's holding everything together at home. So yeah, I work with a lot of couples primarily. Entrepreneurial couples, executives. We do corporate retreats, things like that as well.
So let's talk about some healthy habits, and let's start with sleep. So where do most people go wrong, and what should they do to have better sleep?
I remember a few years ago, I guess this was 10 years ago, I noticed that if I went to bed at 9:30, I felt better. And so anything that I share with my patients, I've always tried it myself. I said, talk to your psychiatrist and see if they've tried all the drugs they're prescribing for you. And I guarantee you they haven't, but anything
Sure.
that I give to my patients, I've tried it myself. So I decided I'm going to go to bed at 9:30. I'm going to wake up at 5:30. And so that's been a pattern of mine for the last 10 years. Now everybody's pattern can be different. Set your bedtime, whatever that may be. We'll just use 9:30. Try to stop eating about 3 hours before you go to bed. That's secret number one. Most
Okay.
people are eating and they go and they need to unwind, and I'll use that in parentheses. And so the wrong choice to make is to turn on Netflix or turn on the football game or whatever. Those things are okay. I mean, I'm not opposed to those whatsoever, but you need to be relaxed before you start consuming any media like that. The biggest thing is if you stop eating at 6:30, ideally, then you also want to stop drinking fluids at least an hour before bed. And if you're over 40 dudes, you probably want to stop drinking fluids about 2 hours before you go to bed, because it's a real thing. Waking up to urinate is a very disruptive part of the night. Everybody gets it. And so just those little things, you're like, oh, that's pretty simple. Obviously, no screens in your bedroom. Get your computer out of your room. Your room ideally is for sleep and sex, right? And a lot of both. Those are just some small things. The other thing is look at how you wake up, because if you wake up in the morning and you're ingesting everything that Facebook wants you to ingest, or Instagram or TikTok, whatever you're consuming for media, that's going to have an impact on how your day looks from a stress perspective. So when you wake up in the morning, I've got training in Eastern medicine and Western medicine, but in the Eastern philosophy, the morning time, you want to get your energy grounded. So that's the very first thing, because essentially your subconscious brain has been fueled at night when we're sleeping. And so now your conscious brain needs to become alert again. And so the more you try to force it through, like wake up in the morning, put the shoes on, go sprint, or drink a cup of coffee to get that stimulant, that first 30 minutes is a really critical time to stay grounded, because your cortisol levels are literally rising for 30 minutes after you wake up, which means your body's natural stimulatory patterns are kicked in. And then if you can let that kick in before you need to do something crazy and get your exercise and workout going or get your coffee, if you just give yourself that 30-minute break when you wake up, then you'll start to see that at night you'll be able to sleep deeper. And so we love to track sleep with like the Aura Ring, or you can use Apple Watch or Whoop, and we can see heart rate variability change just by doing that one little thing, by pushing your coffee back, pushing your workout, just giving yourself 30 minutes to decompress in the morning. Go give your spouse a hug, grab a good book, do something that's not stimulatory, and you'll find that at night you'll sleep much better, especially if you don't eat 3 hours before you go to bed and you don't drink fluids at least an hour before you fall asleep.
So what would you say about waking up, going outside barefoot and just going for a walk for, say, the first 30 minutes before doing anything else? Does that fit that criteria?
Totally. Yeah, getting outside. If you can be exposed to the sun right as the sun's rising and as the sun's setting, like that's the ideal time. The spectrum of the light, those light waves, help reset the melopsin receptors in your brain. And so it will really help calm things down. And it feels pretty darn good.
And I know you're also a huge fan on fasting.
Yeah.
But why is fasting important? Because you hear fasting and it usually is attributed more towards weight loss, but there's a lot more to fasting than just weight loss. Why is that important?
I think if you look at longevity, so one of the things that most doctors miss is what someone's health going to look like 10 years from now. And so I got into fasting. Is kind of an interesting thing that happened is I have a lot of diabetes in my family, and I noticed my hemoglobin A1C was starting to creep up. My fasting blood sugar was starting to creep up. And so what I did is I started studying fasting, and there's a great book called The Circadian Code by Sachin Panda. I realized that not only will fasting help fix the insulin resistance that was just barely in its infancy with me. If I would have let it go, I'd be full-blown diabetic, I'm sure, right now. But by fasting, I learned I could fix that. But the other thing that happens is you change, there's two pathways in your body. There's an mTOR and an AMPK pathway. And so the mTOR pathway is really what helps us grow and it helps us build muscle. But sometimes you want to turn off that pathway and you want to go through a phase called autophagy. And this is where you recycle cells. And so by fasting and putting a little bit of stress on your body, some metabolic stress, those cells that are no longer performing optimally, that's what fasting does. It just gets rid of those cells that are no longer performing optimally. And then what happens on the flip side is you get better hormonal balance, you get cardiovascular strength. And what the research shows is that if you can constrict your eating window to about 8 or 9 hours, it's actually going to increase endurance. And I'm a big mountain biker, skier, snowboarder. And so what I noticed the biggest difference when I started doing what's called time restricted eating, so shortening my eating window, that's when I noticed the biggest difference in my endurance levels. My blood labs improved dramatically. And this is one of the reasons why I started by saying, stop eating at 3 hours before bed, because if you look at the average American, we consume the same amount of calories after dinner that we do during dinner. And so if you just turn that off, it's a great way of just saying, well, your willpower, you don't need to use it because you've already made the one decision like, oh, I'm just not going to eat after dinner. When I'm done, I'm done. And then you'll sleep better, you get trimmed up, and you'll probably live a lot longer too. I'm someone who loves food. Food is really important, and actually taking time throughout the day, if you're intentional around that, is really important. But we have kind of an academic group that I mentor them in peptide therapy and functional medicine and regenerative medicine. But you can see that the distraction with food and the need to feed your body can be overwhelming, and it can get in the way of you doing really big things in life and making an impact. So this is where peptides has been exciting for me, because I started using them about 10 years ago, and it made that fasting that I jumped into 10 times easier, because you don't have that hunger impulse just knocking at your door all the time.
When you're looking at being a high performing CEO, getting 80% of the way, that's easy. Getting to 96, so the next 16%, now it starts getting a little bit harder. You can use your diet, and that can take you maybe 80% of the way in. And then when we're talking about sleep, and now we're going a little bit more advanced, that might be able to take you a little bit closer to 96% with fasting and whatnot, because now we're making it just a little bit harder, and you have to have a little bit more discipline and put more thought. Cold therapy, I know, is another one that you're a fan of right now. But you brought something up just prior to this, and we talk about peptides. The way that I view it, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's going to take somebody the next 4%, because you have to have all those other healthy habits built in to work in conjunction, because not one pill or potion or whatever is going to help if everything else is out of whack. Those who are aware of it, it kind of scares them with this idea of, wait, I'm putting something in my body that it's not FDA approved and all that other fun stuff. So talk to me about peptides, why you're such a huge fan, and let's go from there.
Yeah, so peptides essentially are, they exist in nature, they exist in your body. And what scientists realized, and this goes back, Dr. Kabasin out of Russia, which is where some of the first peptide structures were discovered. He was hired by the Russian military during the Cold War when there was nuclear fallout, and a lot of the soldiers were getting exposed and they were dying. And the Russian general said, hey, we need to solve this problem. Our fatalities are too high. So Dr. Kavassian started using a peptide known today as epitalin. So what Dr. Kavassian did is he was injecting these. He watched the soldiers, and the ones who were still exposed, they didn't end up with cancer. They didn't end up dying. And then when Chernobyl hit, a lot of the patients in the village who had received peptides from him, they didn't get cancer either. And so you just take a peptide like epitalin, for example, it's been shown to lower cholesterol. It's been shown to increase telomeres. And by using 2 cycles of it a year, you can increase your telomeres by 7 years. So we can actually put some energy back into the tank. So that's an important aspect of it. Telomeres are what tighten up your DNA so that you can get better signaling from your cells and less disease manifestation. But since then, there's over 7,000 peptides. And we've sequenced about 700 of those is all. And so 286 of those are actually FDA approved. So a lot of the peptide therapies that we do, what's happened is the pharmaceutical companies, believe it or not, they are very aggressive when they see something that works. A lot of the issues that go on, I think, are more political than for safety reasons, because peptides in general, they've got low toxicity. I look at them and I think they're safer than most herbs and supplements, because your body's got a threshold. And once you put the right amount of peptide in, it's not like you can keep pushing it. It's not like hormones where it's overriding a bodily system. So then your body's own endogenous production declines. Peptides are really powerful because they can work on very specific pathways. And then by optimizing those pathways, it just retrains your body how it needs to function. And that's how you can get that 4 to 5% edge that you couldn't have otherwise.
Now, one of the things that really drove me to having a conversation with you is that you are trained both in Eastern and Western medicine. And I do believe that the answer really is somewhere in the middle, that being one extreme on one side or another isn't, whether it's politically or health or whatnot, is not necessarily a good thing. So you're looking at objective data to figure out what's the best course of action to take. That's what you did for me. You said, okay, objectively, here's what the data is. We're not going to argue with the data, but we're going to say, here's the areas that we need to focus in on. As we focus in on these areas, we'll continue to monitor the data and see how you're feeling and whatnot, and then build you up to health. So it's a very customized type of program. It's much different than saying, I'm going to pick up a book on dieting and this person says to go on keto and to take these supplements. So I'm just going to take a whole bunch of supplements and eat this way. And there's a big difference between East and Western's philosophy.
Well, and I think, you brought up the most important point, which is if you don't have the data, how do you make decisions, right? And it's no different. Scaling profitability is a genius concept because you don't know what's making you profitable if you don't go back and look at the data. And it's the same thing in health. If we don't look at the right markers and the right metrics, and some of them are more meaningful than others. I mean, we can look at blood labs, and just the way that your doctor interprets blood labs is they're waiting for a crisis to show up. So I looked at that and I said, there's got to be a better way that we can go upstream and prevent these, what we call death by neglect. If you're neglecting your health, you can only neglect it for so long before it hits you in the face, before you've got to do something big about it. I would much rather look at your labs and say, okay, Charles, here's what 10 years could look like if we don't fix these small little interferences that are going on right now, versus let's wait till they're really big and then I can be heroic and save your life. It's like, we don't want that. We want you to have a really robust health where you look back and you say, okay, I'm in my mid 40s right now. And what do my mid 50s look like? And how's that going to be better than my mid 40s from a health perspective? And then what's my mid 60s going to look like? And how much more horsepower will I need? Because your enterprise is going to keep growing, right? It's not like business if it's either dying or growing, and you're a growth mindset individual. So then I say, okay, what about the mid 70s? What about the mid 80s? And on, because your doctor's not trained in that way. Western medicine is designed to diagnose a disease. And then once you've got the disease, here's a medication. And how long are you on that medication? Well, usually it's the rest of your life. And that's the big problem with our society is we've been accustomed to watching the drug commercials thinking that you just take a single pill and everything goes away. And I'll say with peptides, it's not the magic thing if you don't have those foundational pieces put in place. Yes, we can help you put the foundation in, like fasting. I use peptides because, I get hungry just like any other human, but you can use peptides to circumvent some of those pathways so you're not as hungry. But if you're not willing to do the work, then they're not going to surpass that 96% mark.
One of the things that I found interesting too is earlier in this podcast, we talked about hormones. There is considered to be a healthy hormone level today for, say, a man of my age. But context is everything, because a healthy hormone level for a guy my age just a decade ago would have been unhealthy. So why are those numbers changing? And how do we know what is considered a healthy level versus an unhealthy level?
This goes back to lab ranges. So every year there's a committee that meets together, and every lab has it. Quest has theirs, LabCorp has theirs. and they just look at averages. So all they're doing is looking at a mathematical equation. And so if you and I went back 30 years ago, you would be shocked. Our testosterone levels in men has dropped almost 50% on average. We have a serious crisis, not only in testosterone, but in infertility because of this. And that's so critical in men because andropause kicks in as our testosterone lowers, then we start to have estrogen levels that rise. And so with the lowering of testosterone, it's based on averages. When we run blood labs, and you probably remember when we talked about yours, is I was taking those ranges and narrowing those. And because I want to look for optimal health. And if we wait until a disease picks up, and if you're taking averages, if you think about how many people in the United States have a chronic disease right now, well, that number is at least 70%, maybe 80%, depending on the study that you look at. And then of those, over 50% have 3 or more chronic diseases. So we're lumping the majority of the population into what we consider to be normal labs. Like having testosterone below 700 is very dangerous for a man, not only from a cardiovascular risk, but from the overall drive and motivation. So anyone on this podcast, that's one of the most important markers you look at, because your brain has over 1,000 times more receptors for testosterone than women, which is one of the reasons we take more risks. We show up in places, we think we look better than we do, according to my wife. We think we're stronger than we are. We think we can handle more things than we realistically can. But that's the fun thing about being a man is we take these things on and we love the adventure of it. But when your testosterone starts to weaken, you lose that ability.
Is the flip side also correct for women? Have you noticed estrogen levels have gone down over the years? What's happening with women?
That's a great question. We're seeing women testosterone levels and progesterone levels are low and estrogen levels are on the rise. Here's why, because in the environment, there's endocrine disruptors, and we could get super technical on this, but endocrine disruptors are basically they're toxins that mimic an estrogen. So those toxins bind on the same estrogen receptors that estrogen should be. And so what happens is the women actually become estrogen dominant because the estrogen can't get into those little receptors where they belong. And so that's where women start gaining weight, even though they're not eating more food. That's where cellulite comes from. It's also where women start to feel a little bit crazy because estrogen's so good for their brain, really good for their skin, good for everything. And then it's the same thing. The woman becomes moody, depressed, loses confidence. Sex becomes painful. It's detrimental. So what we do is everybody who works with me is on a cleanse, and we do nice, gentle cleansing to get rid of those interferences from the toxic elements because they do disrupt hormones. So with women, it's actually would be the inverse, estrogens going up.
The thing is you and I could continue talking for hours and hours and hours. And we've already talked for quite a bit of time beforehand. So I've obviously been a huge fan. I know the impact that health can have not only in our lives personally, but also professionally in making better decisions. But if there was one thing that we want our guests to take out of today's episode, one big thing that could help them get beyond 7 figures from a health standpoint, what is the number one biggest, best tip you've got?
The biggest tip I have is have somebody who is an expert at functional medicine look at your blood labs and let you know where the dangers are that lie ahead, the things that are going to keep you from making those great decisions and keep you from having the mental clarity that you need in your life and to have the horsepower to do great things. Look at your blood labs. If you haven't ran them, then get some testing, because death by neglect is a real thing. We don't want anyone to have surprise visits to the hospital or to the grave. I think the number one thing would be have someone look under the hood who actually knows what to look for and how to optimize your pathways. I think that would supercharge people more than anything.
And if our listeners have decided that someone should be you, where do they find you, contact you, and the whole deal?
2 places. They can go to AccuEastWest.com. We've got a great website there. East West Health is our YouTube page. It's another great place. But the easiest place to actually get the right blood tests ran or to have one of our functional medicine practitioners or myself read your labs is go to the peptideexpert.com.
Got it. The peptideexpert.com or ACU East West. Regan, thank you very much for being a guest here in the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. We've talked a lot today about a number of different ways to help optimize your health to become a top performing CEO in all areas. So we went from sleep to nutrition to hormones and peptides and fasting and so forth. So that wraps up today's episode. For more tips, strategies, and insights on scaling your business beyond seven figures, please remember to also check us out at predictableprofits.com. Again, that's predictableprofits.com. This is Charles Cadet with my friend Regan Archibald, and I will see you in another episode.